talked about building a more mature industry, we may have an opportunity, at least in our educational system. Look, we're dealing with a technology that's a major shift. It's no different than having a horse and buggy or your feet or a horse and then having the railroads come in. It's
Right.
no different than having horse and buggy, the railroads, and then having the automobile. And yes, I've skipped some technologies in there, but those people who created those new technologies were on top of those technologies. They couldn't even dream of what those technologies would be like as they are today. I think we have to start with our students, our education system. We need to talk about what it means to be truly free or have self custody. I mean, I'm going in another direction, but if we start young enough, that's what a lot of people complain about. They say they can't understand this. Well, that's not true. I'm old. Anybody can understand it if they just take small bites at a time. It takes time. But if you start with a young kid, you start with a child, and you start with the basics. I'm not saying cryptography is the goal for a person who's 7 years old, but you start explaining to them simple concepts on what that is, and that goes through that high school age. We're in another generation then. If we're going to be pro crypto, if we're going to be forward thinking, then we really need to train up our next generation to really understand this, because let's just face it, our Xers and our we would call them boomers, that would be, parents of ours, they don't, most of them don't get it, and they may never get it. That doesn't mean they can't participate. In fact, that's my whole goal, is to help them, encourage them. But if we don't take advantage of this opportunity in training up our youth, we've missed a big thing.
They're misunderstanding or not understanding for two different reasons, though. So I think boomers are not understanding because this is a pretty technical thing that they're not used to at all. And I think the younger people are not understanding because they grow up kind of in an age where they didn't, where the idea of ownership of money in particular isn't ingrained. When you and I grew up, it was cash. We had cash.
Sure.
Credit cards were for the elite. You and I, we used dollars, and the feeling of ownership of the money that you have is in your hand, and it's very physical. As things went to PayPal and the idea of ownership or custody of the funds kind of gets lost in the technology. And so and this is bringing it, and crypto really brings that back.
Yeah.
You really have to have an understanding of ownership. And I don't think it's not a matter of like whether it was thought to be taught. I don't think it was specifically taught for us. It was just part of the way the economy works. Like
it's a cultural change.
Yeah.
It's a cultural change.
So, I mean, I teach my kids about ownership, as much as I can. Like, what does ownership mean? And I even have to remind myself sometimes about, like, if I give something to my kid, then I don't actually have a say on what happens to that thing. And like, I have to remind myself. And that just happened. That's why I'm bringing that up. But in my reminding myself and explaining to him, like, if I give something to you, then it's yours, and I don't get to say what happens to that anymore. Those kind of ideas are really lost these days. Like, we don't really teach that, and schools have never taught it because they never really had to. But if we want to teach, like, why custody is important in crypto, the idea of ownership needs to be retaught in a way that it is currently not. Right.
Sure.
That's right.
So go ahead.
The thing is that if you look at the habits that we have taken, is really we have gotten used to trust intermediaries, especially because in most of the Western countries, at least, we have like a pretty strong legal system to be able to, go against people who would attempt to scam you in those transactions. However, in crypto, a lot of time, if you're not careful about your self-custody, then you will be trusting an actor that doesn't have an established reputation, to whom you will not have any recourse to go against, potentially you don't even know who this person is because it's a multi-sig smart contract. It's any of those
Sure.
tools that enable bad actors to be able to shield themselves from any repercussions of their malicious actions. And it becomes even more important to put a very strong accent on why it is very important to understand self custody, understand the technology you are interacting with before actually committing to it.